Switch over. Going live. Well, good morning and welcome to Grace Bible Church. Happy Mother's Day. Today is a day that we choose to celebrate mothers and all mothers. From the ones who went to death's door to have us and to bring us into this world, to the mothers who may not have birthed us but chose to be a mother to us anyway. Today we celebrate all of you. Let's be honest, if it weren't for you, we probably wouldn't be here. So, this morning I have a message that is for you moms. But it's not just for you. It's also for your husbands. It's also for your children and the young men and young women that may be watching also. This morning's message has a little bit for everybody. For the parents, this message carries a challenge. For the children and young adults, it also carries a warning. So, this morning I want us to look at two different types of women that we find in the book of Proverbs. And these are very different women. And when we look at our world today, one of these women has seemed to become abundant and readily available, while the other has become scarce and difficult to find. One of these women, the Bible warns men to stay away from. The other, the Bible says he should seek after. One brings poverty and ruin and destruction. The other is valued far above earthly treasures. The first of these two women can be found in the book of Proverbs chapter 5, verses 3 through 10. And in verse 3 we find, it says, "For the lips of a forbidden woman drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil." The forbidden woman here can be translated in different ways. It can be the forbidden woman, or the adulteress, or the loose woman, or the immoral woman. All of these words fit in the translation of this word and this type of woman. And it's strange to think, but the world idolizes this kind of woman. It elevates her to a position of an idol. It tries to convince our girls that this is the type of woman that every girl should grow up to be. Can you blame them? I mean, they're beautiful, they're sexy, and they're successful. But when you look a little bit closer, things don't look so good. Most of them, their marriages never last. And they go from one husband to the next, to the next, to the next. Their children often struggle with addiction and they're in and out of rehab. They often end up in financial trouble. And then they're quickly forgotten and replaced by someone younger. But this is what our world views as being success. But let's see what the rest of Proverbs has to say about it. Proverbs 5, verses 4 through 6. "But in the end, she is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps take hold of Sheol. She does not ponder the path of life. Her ways are unstable. She does not know it. Her ways are unstable, and she doesn't even know it. You know, everyone else can look at her life and the decisions that she's making and the things that she's doing, and everyone else can see exactly how it's going to end. They can see exactly where it's going to take her. But not her. She can't see it. And so many girls today who choose to chase after the bad boys are a lot like this woman. They chase after and want to date the bad boy only to be shocked and surprised when he's unfaithful to her. Just like he was with the 15 girls he dated before her. But she didn't see it. And she can't understand why this would happen to her. Or she ends up pregnant and he just moves on. And she can't understand why he wouldn't stay. She just can't see that he was never devoted to her in the first place. But instead, she was just simply the place he would go to get the things he wanted. And nothing more. But she just can't see why it happens to her. Proverbs chapter 5 continues with advice to the young men. Verses 7 through 10 says, "Now then, my sons, listen to me, and do not depart from the words of my mouth. Keep your way far from her, and do not go near the door of her house, or she will give your vigor to others, and your years to the cruel one. And strangers will be filled with your strength, and your hard-earned goods will go to the house of an alien." Here the author warns young men to stay away from these women. Yet so many young men still choose to chase after them. Time and time again we see that the wrong woman can ruin a good man. She can use her influence in his life to draw him and to pull him away from God, away from his family, away from his friends, away from his dreams and goals, and even more. The wrong woman can ruin a good man. The Bible repeatedly warns about choosing to marry the wrong kind of woman. So, young men, I charge you, choose wisely. Because you'll have to live with your choice. Literally. But let's look at the other woman. Let's look at the woman of Proverbs 31. Looking at verses 10 through 12, it says, "An excellent wife who can find? For her worth is far above jewels. The heart of her husband trusts her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life." Now this is more like it. Her husband can trust her. She's good to him, and she's good for him. It goes on to talk about the characteristics of this woman and the things that she does. It talks about how she cares for her family, how she's proactive and generous and charitable and kind and wise and modest. She works hard to make sure that her family has the things that it needs. What a woman. And let's look at the results of being this kind of woman. Verses 28 through 30 of chapter 31. Her children rise up and bless her. Her husband also, and he praises her, saying, Many daughters have done nobly, but you excel them all. Charm is deceitful, and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Now, doesn't that sound so much better? Doesn't that sound better than the end of the description in Proverbs 5? If you go back and look at verses 11 through 14, it describes at the end of the man's life when everything he has is gone. Now he regrets not listening to those who warned him about chasing after the immoral woman. At the end of his life, he looks back and wishes he would have just listened to those who advised him not to do it. But here, the virtuous woman's children rise up and bless her, and her husband also sings her praises. Which one of these two women do you think sounds the most happy? Which husband do you think is happier? Which of their children? You know, as parents of daughters today, we hold much of the responsibility of deciding which one of these two women our daughters grow up to be. And the things that we do to teach them and train them as they're young will greatly impact the type of adults that they turn into. And the thing is I know that some, regardless of how well they were trained, of how well they were taught and raised, some of them will still choose to go the wrong way. They will still choose to walk down the wrong path. But it's our responsibility as parents to make sure that they have everything they need to make the right decision and to go the right way. That's our job as moms and as dads. As parents of sons, we also hold much of the responsibility of deciding which of these two women will eventually become our daughter-in-laws. Which one of these two women that our sons will choose to commit themselves to. We need to train our sons which types of women they should really find attractive and why. We should also be training them to become the type of men who will attract the type of woman that we want to show up in their lives. We should train them to be men of God in a world filled with grown boys. And the thing is fathers also play a big role in this. They play a very big role in all of these things, whether they're raising sons or daughters. Dads, don't neglect your responsibility. You've got a job to do in raising your children. It's not just your wife's job. It's yours as well. Make sure you are doing your job. Because you see, boys will often treat their wives the way that their dad treated their mom. And girls will often expect it to be treated by their own husbands the same way they saw their dad treat their mom. So what kind of example are you being for your children? Would you be okay watching some boy treat your daughter the way that you treat your wife? Or would you beat the snot out of that boy and send him packing? What kind of an example are you being for your children? Men, I charge you to be the kind of man that you want your daughter to marry. Be the kind of man that you want to see her end up with. Because truth is, she's likely to end up with the same kind of man that her mom did. You have a lot to do with that. Choose wisely. Mothers also play a very big role in these things. Whether they want to admit it or not, many boys end up marrying someone that reminds them of their mother. Many girls end up following in the footsteps of their mothers. What kind of example are you being for your children? Are you walking in such a way that you would be proud to see your child follow after you? That you would be proud to watch them walk in your footsteps and to do the things that you've done? Which brings me to my challenge for all of us who are parents, for all of us who are husbands and wives. Many of us likely take our spouse for granted. We likely don't treat them with the dignity, love, and respect that they truly deserve. And it's sad to think about how many couples get this so wrong. Ephesians chapter 5 lays out two of the most difficult responsibilities of husbands and wives. Ephesians chapter 5 verses 22 through 24 addresses the wives. And I know for many of you ladies this isn't a very popular set of scriptures, but here it is anyway. Wives, be subject to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ also is the head of the church, he himself being the Savior of the body. But as the church is subject to Christ, also the wives ought to be to their husbands in everything. I know this is a tough one for a lot of ladies. And it's not one that many of them like to listen to. But I encourage you to do it. I encourage you to strive after it. It doesn't say, wives, be subject to your husband as other wives are to theirs. It says, be subject to your husband as you are to the Lord. And I know there are multiple reasons why this is tough for some women. Most women. For some, it's tough because you chose a man who's just hard to be submissive to. But remember, you chose him. You're the one who said yes. You're the one who said, I do. And God had already given these instructions before you chose the man that you chose. So whether or not he's someone that you feel you should be submissive to, God has said, be submissive to your husband. Now, does that mean that he should be able to treat you like a slave and you should just go along with it and do everything he tells and expects you to do? I don't really think that's what God was getting at. And I really think as we look at the next set of scriptures that address the men, that some of that will become obvious. But what it does mean is that you should recognize the God-given authority that he has as the head of the home. And give him the respect that comes with that position. That means not trying to usurp his authority. That means not trying to be the boss. And I know that's really hard sometimes. It really is. But the thing you have to ask yourself is, who are you doing it for? Are you doing it for that hard-headed, stubborn man? Or are you doing it for Jesus? Because he's the one who asked you to. And the good news is it can become easier. Especially if we as husbands will do our part. If we will hold up to our responsibility, then it makes it way easier for our wives to choose to submit to us the way that God intended. Because you see, the truth is, gentlemen, we have a much more difficult responsibility than even the ladies do. They simply have to choose to submit to the authority that God has given us as head of the home, which, by the way, you will answer to God for, the way that you have handled your household. You will answer to God for the way that you have raised your children. You will answer to God for the way that you treat your wife. Don't forget that. With that role and with that authority comes a responsibility that God's going to hold you to. And our responsibility to our wife is far more difficult than theirs. Ephesians chapter 5, verses 25 through 29 says, "Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her." Say that one more time. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her, so that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, that he might present to himself the church in all her glory, having no spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she would be holy and blameless. So husbands ought also to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his own wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ also does the church. Now, I don't know about you, but that's a tall order. Men, do you realize that you have been commanded by God to love your wife sacrificially, as Christ loved the church? You were to love your wife the same way. Is there anything that Jesus wouldn't do for his bride? I mean, I think we can go back to the Gospels and see that he's proven that there's nothing he wouldn't do for her. There's nothing that he wouldn't do for her benefit. He suffered and died for her. Yet, how many of us men aren't even willing to suffer enough to do the dishes, to wash and fold clothes, or to rub her feet after a long day? But instead, we tend to be so focused on ourselves and our own selfish wants and desires that we ignore our God-given calling when it comes to our wives. Does this verse sound like we should be treating our wives like a maid or a cook or a daycare worker? I don't think so. And don't try to give me the excuse, well, I work all day. Suck it up, Buttercup. That's part of the curse. When Adam and Eve sinned back in Genesis, God told Adam he was going to have to work. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but God's message to you came well after his message to Adam. Yeah, you're going to have to work. It's part of the curse. But just because you work does not give you the ability or the reason to be able to get out of loving your wife sacrificially the way God has told you to. Yeah, you have to work all day. But you still have to love your bride the way Jesus loves his. So many husbands and wives take each other for granted. They'll do things for other people without hesitation or without complaining, but then turn around and let their husband or wife ask them to do the same thing and they'll refuse. They view ministry outside of the home as more important than ministry within the home. We'll cook a special meal for someone in the church or someone in the community, or we'll rebuild or repair something for someone else and then turn around and not do the same thing for our spouse when they ask for it. How is that showing the love of Christ? How is that showing what we've been called to do to our children? What kind of example are you setting for your children, for your sons and for your daughters? Would we be okay with them dating someone who treated them like we treat our spouse? If not, then change. Do things differently. Set a different example so that they can see what right looks like. So they can see what they should be looking for. Change. You know, I overheard someone say once that my wife was spoiled. And she would be one of the first ones to tell you that that is absolutely true. I do everything I can to spoil my wife and to spoil my daughter. I do things for them. I serve them. Not that I've got this husband and father thing down pat. My wife would also be one of the first ones to tell you that I blow it all the time. I don't always do all of the things that I should do. I don't always help the way that I should. But I try to make it a mission every single day to do things for them and to do things with them. To be the example for my daughter of what she should look for in a man. I pray that one day my daughter finds someone who will love her the way that her dad has loved her mom. I've tried to be that for her. To be an Ephesians 5 kind of man. One who loves God and loves her sacrificially. So what about you, Mom? What about you, Dad? What kind of example are you setting for your children? Is it a godly example of what a husband or a wife should be? And if not, what are you going to do about it? What about you, young man, young woman? Are you focused on finding the kind of spouse that God has advised you to look for? A Proverbs 31 woman or an Ephesians 5 man? Is that where your focus has been? Or have you been so focused on not being alone that you'll take anything that shows a little bit of interest? Here's your challenge for today. Instead of focusing on finding Mr. Right or Mrs. Right, focus on becoming God's definition of Mr. and Mrs. Right. Focus on you and becoming the husband that your wife is going to need you to be one day. Becoming the wife that your husband is going to need one day. And when you're ready, trust that God will send Mr. or Mrs. Right to you. But the thing is why should God bless you with something you're not even ready for in the first place? Just a thought. And I know it's Mother's Day, but I think today's message has a little bit of something for all of us. Not just moms, but dads and sons and daughters as well. But the thing is none of this has been worth anything if we don't take it and apply it in our own lives. If all we do is hear it and go back to doing things the way we have always done them, then what has any of this accomplished? So what will you do with what you've heard today? What will you do with the challenges that you have been issued today? The choice is yours. And just like what God charges the young men with, I charge you also, choose wisely. Till next time, may God richly bless you and your families. Happy Mother's Day.